The air in their suburban home in Vermont always had a certain stillness to it, a calm that you'd mistake for peace. But it wasn't peace. It was a vacuum, an emptiness filled only with the silent routine of her husband, Robert. From the outside, their life was a picture of suburban bliss. Samantha was a freelance graphic designer, and Robert, he was a software consultant. He worked for a big tech firm in Boston, or so she thought. Every morning, he'd kiss her goodbye, a quick, almost perfunctory peck on the cheek. He'd grab his briefcase, and he'd walk out the front door, just like any other hardworking man. She'd hear the satisfying click of the lock, followed by the familiar hum of their car pulling out of the driveway. But if she had bothered to look out the window, she would have seen something strange. The car would sit there for a few minutes, its engine idling, before he'd slowly, almost stealthily, drive it back into the garage. Then, he'd slip back into the house through the side door, descend the narrow staircase to the basement, and disappear. For 8 years, this was their life. Perfect, polished lie. Samantha's world was a comfortable monotony. She'd spend her days in her home office, surrounded by her Wacom tablet and a dozen half-empty coffee mugs. The only sounds were the soft hum of her computer and the faint, muffled noises from downstairs. Robert's office. He always insisted on working in the basement. He said he needed the quiet, the isolation, to focus on complex coding projects. She never questioned it. Why would she? She trusted him. He was her rock, her steady, dependable partner. He'd emerge at exactly 6 p.m., just in time for dinner. He'd be clean-shaven, smelling faintly of a cologne she'd bought him years ago. His tie would be loosened, his shirt sleeves rolled up. He looked the part of a man who'd just battled the corporate world, a tired warrior returning to his castle. He'd talk about his meetings, his projects, the mundane dramas of office life. He knew every detail, every character in his fictional company. He spoke of a coworker named Mark who always stole his lunch, of a demanding boss named Mr. Henderson, of late-night deadlines and frantic code fixes. It was a meticulously crafted world, so real that Samantha never once considered it was an elaborate fiction. But then, things started to change. It began with the little things. A credit card statement arrived with a charge for an expensive bottle of whiskey, a brand Robert never drank. He was a creature of habit, a simple beer man. She asked him about it, and he just shrugged, saying it was a gift for a client. The explanation was logical, but a tiny, discordant note had been struck. A few weeks later, she found a receipt for a lavish meal at a restaurant in Boston, the same city where he supposedly worked. The date was a Tuesday. He had told her he was working late that night, that he had a critical project to finish. But the receipt wasn't just for him. It was for two. She mentioned it casually, and he froze for a split second before smoothly covering it up. He said he had taken a client out to dinner, and the other name on the receipt was the client's wife. Another logical explanation. Another small crack in the perfect facade. The bigger changes were more unsettling. Robert started getting agitated. His easygoing nature slowly eroded, replaced by a nervous energy. He'd snap at her over trivial things, his eyes filled with a panicked, guarded look she'd never seen before. The basement door, which was usually left slightly ajar, was now always locked. He'd carry the key with him at all times. She once tried to bring him a cup of coffee, and he'd burst out of the basement, snatched the mug from her hand, and barked, "Just leave it on the stairs, Sam. I'm in the middle of something." The tone was harsh, a complete departure from the gentle man she knew. It wasn't just a change in his mood. It was a shift in their entire dynamic. The unspoken rules of their lives were being rewritten, and she was the last to know. One evening, a storm knocked out the power. The whole neighborhood was dark, and the silence was deafening. Samantha grabbed a flashlight and went to check on Robert. She found him at the top of the basement stairs, a panicked look on his face. "Don't go down there," he said, his voice a low growl. It's not safe." She just stared at him. Not safe? What could possibly be unsafe in their own basement? He stammered, his usual calm demeanor gone. "The wires, the servers. It's a mess. I don't want you to get hurt." She reluctantly backed away, but the image of his fear-stricken face stayed with her. This wasn't about a tech project. This was about something else entirely. As she lay in bed that night, the hum of the generator the only sound, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was living with a stranger. The man she married was a phantom, and his life, a meticulously constructed mirage. She had to know what was in that basement. She had to find the truth, no matter how terrifying it was. The calm that once defined their lives had been shattered, and in its place, a chilling dread began to take hold. The power outage was a wake-up call, a jarring and sudden intrusion that tore a hole in the fabric of their meticulously woven lives. Samantha couldn't sleep. The image of Robert's terrified face, his desperate warning, replayed in her mind like a broken record. The man who had been her rock, her steady and dependable partner, had become a stranger, a walking enigma. The next morning, the power was back, but the unsettling silence remained. Robert went through his usual routine, a performance honed over 8 years. He kissed her, walked out the front door, and disappeared into the garage. But this time, Samantha didn't go to her office. She watched from the window. The car started, pulled out of the driveway, and just as she expected, slowly reversed back in. He slipped back into the house, and the basement door clicked shut. The charade was in full swing, but now she was an active participant, an audience member who knew the script. The more she looked, the more the pieces of the puzzle started to fit together in a horrifying new picture. She went to the garage and found a car seat in the back of his vehicle, but it wasn't a child's seat. It was a padded, oddly shaped seat, the kind you'd see in a car built for a disabled person. What was it for? He didn't have any relatives who needed that kind of equipment. The small things, the things she'd overlooked, now stood out in stark relief. The expense for the expensive whiskey wasn't a client gift. A quick Google search revealed that it was a rare and highly sought-after brand, one that only a true aficionado would buy. The restaurant receipt for 2 wasn't a business dinner. The date, a Tuesday, was a private event. A quick phone call to the restaurant confirmed it. The event was a charity gala, and the names on the receipt were not Robert's and a client's wife, but 2 other names. Names she didn't recognize. The man she was married to was a ghost. His life, a carefully constructed narrative, was coming undone. The paranoia started to set in. Samantha began to feel like she was living in a haunted house, not with ghosts, but with a ghost of a man she thought she knew. She began to notice the strange deliveries that arrived for him, packages from obscure companies, with no return address. One day, a large crate arrived, and she saw the delivery man struggle to get it down the basement stairs. The delivery man looked at her and said, "Ma'am, your husband has a lot of supplies." Supplies for what? He never mentioned any projects that required heavy machinery. Her heart pounded in her chest. The secrets were starting to pile up, each one heavier than the last. She tried to confront him, but he'd evade her questions with practiced ease, his face a mask of feigned innocence. "Sam, you're worrying about nothing. It's just work stuff. You know how it is." He'd flash that boyish smile she fell in love with, and for a moment, she'd almost believe him. But the illusion was cracking, and she knew it was only a matter of time before it shattered completely. One afternoon, she heard a strange sound from the basement, a low, guttural moan that sent a chill down her spine. It wasn't the sound of machinery. It was the sound of a living thing in pain. She crept to the top of the stairs, her heart thudding in her chest like a drum. The sound stopped. She heard a hushed, frantic whisper. "Shoo, quiet. She's home." A second later, Robert's face appeared at the top of the stairs, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and rage. "What are you doing?" he hissed. "You know you're not allowed down here." Samantha stammered. I just heard a noise. Are you okay?" He gave her a long, cold stare, and then, with a surprising amount of force, he pushed her away from the stairs. "Go back to your office, Sam. Now." The mask had fallen completely. The gentle, loving man was gone, replaced by a monster she didn't recognize. She retreated, her mind reeling. What was he hiding? Who was with him? The questions were like poison, and they were slowly killing her. Later that night, As Robert slept, a deep and unnerving sleep, Samantha knew she had to act. She had to get into that basement. She went to the kitchen and found the spare key to the basement door, a key he had meticulously hidden inside a hollowed-out book on a bookshelf. She tiptoed down the stairs, the cool air of the basement hitting her like a shock. The air was stale, musty, and it smelled of antiseptic and something else, something metallic and vaguely organic. She saw a dimly lit room, a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. There were computers, servers, and monitors, just as he had said. But that wasn't all. There was a medical bed in the corner with restraints on it, and there was a large, black curtain pulled across one side of the room, hiding something from view. She walked towards it, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was about to discover the truth. The entire narrative of her life, the home she thought she knew, was about to be rewritten. And she was terrified of what she would find behind that curtain. The fabric of her life, once a smooth and seemingly flawless tapestry, had been unraveled thread by thread, and she was standing at the frayed edge, ready to face the void. Samantha's hand trembled as she reached for the edge of the large black curtain, the chill in the air doing little to quell the rising heat of her fear. The metallic, organic smell was stronger now, a scent that hinted at a life not lived, but merely endured. With a shaky breath, she pulled back the curtain, and the world as she knew it shattered into a million fragmented pieces. What she saw wasn't a monster or a dangerous experiment or a second woman. It was a man lying on a medical bed, hooked up to a tangle of tubes and wires. He was pale, gaunt, and his eyes were open, staring blankly at the ceiling. He was breathing, but barely. His hand, thin and skeletal, lay on his chest. It was Robert, but it wasn't. It was his twin, a twin she had never known about. He had a faint scar on his forehead, a subtle difference that marked him as someone else. A small name tag was clipped to his hospital gown, a name she'd never heard before, Ryan. He was alive, but barely. His skin was translucent, his lips a faint blue. And then she saw the tubes. A feeding tube and 4 drip and a series of monitors beeping softly. It was a makeshift hospital room. The computers, the servers, the work he did, it was all a ruse, a sophisticated system designed to monitor and sustain this man's life. A low growl from behind her made her jump. It was Robert, his eyes filled with a terrifying mix of despair and rage. "What are you doing, Sam?" he whispered, his voice dangerously low. "You weren't supposed to see this. You weren't supposed to know." He lunged forward and grabbed her arm, his grip like a vice. "He's my brother, my identical twin brother, Ryan." He dragged her to a chair and forced her to sit. The story, a horrifying and heartbreaking saga, spilled out of him. When they were kids, Ryan had been in a terrible car accident. A drunk driver had hit them, and while Robert had escaped with minor injuries, Ryan had been in a coma ever since. For years, their parents had cared for him, but as they grew old, the burden became too much. Robert, consumed by guilt and a desperate, unwavering love for his brother, had taken on the responsibility. He had created the perfect life, a life of deceit and isolation, to hide the truth. His job wasn't a job at all. It was a cover story, a lie he'd meticulously crafted to spend every waking moment with Ryan, to monitor his vitals, to adjust the machines, to keep him alive. The strange deliveries weren't supplies for a project. They were medical equipment and nutritional supplements. The expensive whiskey wasn't a gift. It was a rare spirit he'd bought to sell online, to make a little extra money for Ryan's costly care. The restaurant receipt wasn't a business dinner. It was a charity gala he had attended with his parents, a one-time outing, a rare break from his self-imposed prison. The moan she heard was Ryan, a fleeting, unconscious sound that had escaped from his lips. The car seat was a custom-made seat for his brother, for the rare occasions he would risk taking him out for a breath of fresh air, a moment of fleeting freedom. The man she loved wasn't a liar. He was a guardian, a brother trapped in an impossible situation. Samantha's heart ached with a pain so profound it was physical. She had been so wrong. Her suspicion, her fear, her paranoia. It was all a product of a half-truth she couldn't understand. She looked at Robert, her husband, the man she thought she knew. His eyes were red, his face streaked with tears he was trying to hide. He wasn't a monster. He was a victim, a man who had sacrificed his entire life, his dreams, his identity, for the one person he loved more than anyone else. But then, a terrifying realization dawned on her. The car he drove away and then drove back. It wasn't about the lie. It was a ritual. He'd pull away, a symbolic gesture of going to work, and then he'd come back, his life perpetually tethered to this basement. He wasn't just living a lie. He was living a perpetual sacrifice. And now she was a part of it. The lie had become her reality, her prison. The question wasn't what was behind the curtain anymore. The question was, what were they going to do now? She was bound to this secret, to this man, to his brother, and to a life she never knew she had signed up for. The silence that followed Robert's confession was a heavy, suffocating blanket. It wasn't the silence of peace, but the quiet of two souls confronting an unbearable truth. Samantha's anger, her fear, her suspicion. It all evaporated, replaced by a profound sense of sorrow and a chilling clarity. The man she had loved for so long was not a ghost. He was a martyr, a man who had chosen a life of perpetual sacrifice for the sake of another. The beautiful, quiet life she had cherished was nothing more than a carefully constructed tomb, and she had been living in it all along. The coming days were a blur of hushed conversations and emotional confrontations. Samantha didn't leave. She couldn't. She spent her time in the basement, learning about Ryan, learning about the life that had been so cruelly taken from him. She learned how to change the forebags, how to monitor the machines, how to gently clean his face with a damp cloth. She'd talk to him, telling him about her day, about the mundane dramas of the world above. She'd hold his hand, her fingers wrapping around his cold, lifeless ones. It was a new normal, a terrifying and heartbreaking reality. The house was no longer a home. It was a sanctuary, a hospital, a prison. Robert's performance of going to work every day became a shared ritual, a desperate, pathetic attempt to maintain a semblance of normalcy in a world that had become irrevocably broken. But the facade was crumbling. The emotional and financial toll was becoming unbearable. The costs of Ryan's care were astronomical, and Robert's job no longer provided enough to cover them. He was selling off their possessions piece by piece to make ends meet. The tension between them was a palpable, suffocating force. They were trapped, and there seemed to be no way out. One evening, as they sat in the quiet living room, the beeping of the monitors from the basement a faint, constant reminder of their burden, Samantha finally spoke. "Robert," she said, her voice a soft tremor. "We can't do this alone anymore. We need help." Robert shook his head, his eyes filled with a stubborn, desperate denial. "No, I can't. He's my responsibility. What if they take him away? What if they put him in a home?" Samantha knew she had to make him see reason. "They won't take him away. They'll help us. There are resources, a better place for him. A place with professional nurses and doctors, with the care he truly needs." It was a bitter pill to swallow. Giving up control, admitting defeat, and trusting a system he had so meticulously avoided for so long. But the alternative was slow, agonizing ruin. A few days later, they made the call. It was the hardest thing they had ever done. The day the ambulance arrived, the silence in the house was even more profound. The paramedics carefully wheeled Ryan out on a stretcher, and Robert and Samantha stood on the porch, watching him disappear into the back of the ambulance. The red and blue lights a flash of fleeting hope. Robert finally let go. He broke down, the grief and the exhaustion of 8 years of sacrifice finally crashing over him. Samantha wrapped her arms around him, holding him as he sobbed, two broken people clinging to each other in the wake of a shattered life. The ending wasn't a fairy tale. Ryan's new home was a nursing facility, a clean and professional environment, but it was still a cold and sterile place. Robert and Samantha visited him every day, and they learned to live with the truth, to live with the ghost of a life they almost had. The quiet in their house was no longer a deception. It was the quiet of a shared sorrow, a bond forged in pain and sacrifice. The life they had was forever marked by the one they had lost, and the secret they had kept. They were no longer living a lie, but they were not truly free either. Their love was real, but it was a love born of tragedy, a bond that would forever be tied to the man who never left the basement. The story of Robert and Samantha is a reminder that sometimes the most profound lies are the ones we tell ourselves, and the deepest secrets are the ones we keep out of love. It's a story about the devastating power of guilt and the lengths we will go to protect the people we love. If you were moved by this story, please show your support by liking this video, subscribing to our channel, and hitting that notification bell so you don't miss our next chilling tale. We'll be waiting.